Hello, everyone. Mike Starks with Remax Town and Country here, bringing you the third quarter real estate market report for 2025. And, you know, pretty much like the rest of the world, the real estate world is just still all over the place, and it's kind of hard to predict what's coming next at the moment. And, I'm sure you don't have to listen to me spouting numbers and data to know that the market is still pretty much on the sluggish side in Fredericksburg and Gillespie County. Don't get me wrong, we're still plugging along. Things are still selling. Not anything overpriced. But other overall volume remains down, even though we are selling some stuff. And I've had a lot of questions on the last month about if I thought the interest rate cut would spur real estate sales. And the quarter point they cut last month was really not as big as most people had hoped for. And in my opinion, Powell's speech about the Fed planning to cut rates once, maybe twice more this year, and again the first part of next year, was really just a speech saying, maybe you should wait a little longer. Interest rates might be better. But beyond just interest rates, I really think the country's just having kind of identity crisis as a whole. A lot of folks are just kind of worried about what's going to happen next year, or heck, what's going to happen next month. But of course, the Fed does have a big influence on the economy. And like I've said many times, I'm just not a big fan of the Fed. I think they create most of the booms and busts. Now, I'm sure most of you out there realize that the Fed rate is really just the rate of interest that banks lend to other banks short term, like overnight loans. And mortgage rates are really more influenced by the 10-year bond market. And, really, as long as the stock market remains as strong as it is, I'm really not sure how much movement we're going to see in mortgage rates. But nonetheless, the Fed is still one of the largest influences on the economy. And I really think when Powell's out of office next year, we'll see some interest rate cuts, and we're more than likely going to see some quantitative easing begin again. And, that's just the Fed creating money out of thin air. And that will certainly jumpstart, many sectors of the economy, including real estate. But ultimately, in the next few years and 5 years, it's going to, we're going to be right back to where we are, with just too high of inflation, down cycle again. So anyway, and on another note, if you love reading, there's a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island by Edward G. Griffin. It's kind of a long book, but it's a great book about how the Fed was set up, and it's actually kind of scary. But anyway, I'm sure if you're watching this, you really are more interested in what's happening in Gillespie County and Fredericksburg real estate markets. So as always, let's just go straight to the data. And like I usually do, I'll begin talking about everything that's sold in Gillespie County. And at the beginning, I'm going to start with just like the third quarter, so July to September. And then I'm going to talk about the first 3 quarters of the year, just for some comparisons. So to begin, in 2025, July to September, we've sold about $78,842,000 worth of real estate in Gillespie County. You compare that to the third quarter of 2024, where we'd sold $90,256,000 worth of real estate. That's down about 12.64%. And the number of individual properties sold is about the same percentage, with 109 individual listings selling Gillespie County from July to September in 2025, and 123 individual property sales in 2024. So that's down about 11.38% for the third quarter. But if you look at the first 3 quarters combined, we're doing a little bit better. With the total dollars sold from January 1st to September 30th of 2025 being $236,950,000. You compare that to the same period of 2024, where we sold $258,585,000. So that's only down about 8.36%. And kind of the same thing on the individual transactions. For the first 3 quarters of 2025, we sold 329 properties compared to 345 individual property sales in 2024. So that's only down about 4.3%. And if you watch this report regularly, or even if you just look at the quarterly spreadsheet on my website, you'll see we've been down every quarter. And the reason that, we're down more in the third quarter than the whole year is because we really had a pretty good, strong June and July. And, I really thought things were kind of headed in the right direction, but then August and September have slipped back down again. And I think some of this is for the reasons I mentioned above. And just for a little bit of perspective, if we go back to 2022 before COVID, the real estate market in 21, before it got crazy, we'd sold about 264 million. So we're still slow, even if we go all the way back and take out the crazy years. We'd actually have to go back 7 years to find the same dollar volume that we're currently trading in Gillespie County right now. But don't worry, it's not all bad news. For instance, if we look at in-town home sales, excluding STRs, we're actually up a little bit this year. For 2025, January 1st to September 30th, the first 3 quarters, we've sold $68,205,000 worth of homes in Fredericksburg. And you compare that to $62,979,000 worth of homes in 2024 for the first 3 quarters. That's actually up 8.29%. And the number of individual home sales for the first 3 quarters of this year is also slightly up, with 124 home sales in 2025 and 120 individual home sales in 2024. Not a big increase, but 3.3%. But as mentioned, most of that bump was June and July, because if we just look at the third quarter of this year, so July to September of 2025, we sold $20,858,000 worth of homes, compared to the third quarter of 2024, where we sold $22,199,000 worth of single-family homes in the city limits, which makes the third quarter down about 6.4% in sales. And unit sales were roughly the same, with only 39 individual single-family transactions in the city limits for the third quarter of 2025, and 46 individual home sales for the third quarter of 2024. So the total number of units sold is down about 15.21%. However, another kind of bit of good news is, even though the market remains sluggish, single-family home prices in Fredericksburg remain pretty strong. It may be taking a little longer to sell, but still pretty strong. So as of the third quarter of 2025, that's January to September, the average home price in Fredericksburg city limits is at $550,046, or $279.34 per foot. You compare that to the end of 2024, the average price per home in Fredericksburg city limits was $274.32 per foot. So that's actually up 8.39%, which is really pretty strong, all things considered. And I can tell you, most of the nation, wished their single-family home prices were doing as well as Fredericksburg. Now, I would say probably the segment of the market that's still struggling the most is the short-term rental market. I've said it before, we just ended up with too many short-term rentals. So not many of those guys are making money, combined with the city's combative attitude in recent years toward STRs, new hotel rooms being available. All that's kind of contributed to that struggle. But just to look at the first 3 quarters, so just from January 1st to September 30th, 2025, in the city limits, we've only sold $20,180,000 worth of short-term rentals, compared to the first quarter of 2024, where we'd sold $31,486,000 worth of short-term rentals. That's a pretty big drop at 34.9% in total dollar volume. And again, roughly the same in the number of individual STR units sold, with only 30 individual transactions for the first 3 quarters of this year, compared to 47 individual transactions for the first 3 quarters of 2024. So that's down about 36.12%. And even 2024 was down over 50% from the peak of 2022. And of course, that lack of demand is resulting in a softening of prices. For the first 3 quarters of this year, so January to September, the average price per foot of an STR in Fredericksburg is currently at $405.13. But if we look at only the third quarter, July to September, the average price per foot is down to $351.54 per foot. You compare that to the end of 2024, where the average price per foot for an STR in the city limits was $445.01. That's a drop of about 21%, comparing the third quarter of this year to the end of last year. And of course, ST owners are struggling to stay booked, and that's also got a lot to do with the fact that, just from 2020 to 2023, we doubled the number of STRs in the city limits. And also on another quick note, if you're an STR owner, I'm not sure how widespread this is, but I've seen 3 emails now that, not to me, but from other people that shared it with me, that appear to be from the city of Fredericksburg with a very convincing PDF attachment that appears to be signed by city staff. So if you get an email that looks like it's from the city saying you need to wire money to the city or your permit's going to get revoked, and you're not expecting anything like that, maybe give the city a call and verify it's legit before you wire any money. So anyway, let's move on to rural residential, where we have a little more good news. If we look at homes on acreage in Gillespie County, we're still holding pretty steady with $77,849,000 worth of real estate sold in the first 3 quarters of 25, compared to $77,653,000 in 2024. So the total volume year to year is up 0.25%. Yeah, I know that's very minor, but hey, let's take some good news where we can find it. In the number of individual transactions that have sold is running about the same too, with 69 transactions for the first 3 quarters of 2025 and 68 transactions for the first 3 quarters of 2025. So pretty much the same, and still lots of people looking to move to the country. Now let's talk about raw land sales in Gillespie County. Here we're down a little as well. I think some of those contributing factors are things just like the cost of building materials and labors have increased quite a bit. So finding something pre-existing that you like is probably a little less expensive and a lot less headache than trying to build right now. But for the numbers, so far for the first 3 quarters of 2025, we've sold 2,132 acres of land in Gillespie County for $41,997,000. You compare that to the first 3 quarters of 2024, where we sold 2,239 acres for a total of $49,922,000. So our total dollar volume for the first 3 quarters of this year in raw land transactions is down about 15.7%. And like I said, that's mainly due to smaller tracts selling at the moment because, the number of transactions on raw land is actually slightly up by 2.9%, with 69 individual, raw land tracts selling in the first 3 quarters of this year compared to 67 individual raw land tracts selling in the first 3 quarters of 2024. And just for a quick breakdown of the acreage segments, as of September 30th of this year, 1 to 5 acres is going to cost you about $61,321 per acre. A 5 to 10 acre tract is going to average at $34,416 per acre. 11 to 25 acres is going to run you $30,996,000 per acre on average. 26 to 50 acres, $13,742 per acre. And I mentioned in the last report, that number is significantly lower than it has been, but the 3 sales we've had have all been kind of out west and not just the prettiest of land. So I'd suspect that number is not going to hold up. But anyway, 51 to 100 acres is currently averaging $23,832 an acre. 101 to 250 acres, $9,151 per acre. Again, that's based on 2 sales west of town. And then 251 plus acres, we've only had one of those tracts sell this year, and that price came in at $12,222 per acre. And for anyone curious about the prices at Boot Ranch, right now, for the first 3 quarters of this year, the average price per acre out there is $379,473 per acre. Let's see. And an average city lot right now for the first 3 quarters of this year would cost you $204,343. And then, usually I talk about property on Highway 290 East, which was really a hot commodity back a few years ago, but that also has just really slowed down with no real sales to report in the last 9 months. Let's see. Then a quick note on commercial. I've said it before. A lot of commercial stuff never really makes it to MLS. But if we look at what MLS does have this year for 2025, we sold 9 commercial listings for a total of $15,824,000. In 2024, we've also sold 9 listings for the first 3 quarters for a total of $13,350,000 million. Sorry. So no real big news there. And with that, I think I'll end the third quarter report for 25. There's always a lot of other details I can get into, but I think I'll wait till the year-end report to go any deeper. Actually, I'm thinking I might do like two separate little videos, one for in-town and one more concerning out-of-town properties for the end of year report, so these videos aren't quite so long. But as always, if you want more information, you can find pretty much all these stats on my website at mikestarks.com under the real estate tab. If you've got questions, you can write to me, you can call me. If you got a question, I've been doing radio interviews just talking about the real estate market quarterly now. So maybe I'll even share that on the radio if you'd like me to. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to talking to you at the end of the year.